Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today to unpack influencer marketing in our conversation on the evolution of influence. Before we get started, let me quickly have each of our panelists introduce themselves. I'm going to go in order of what I see on my screen. So, Brad, let's start with you.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Brad Stewart. I'm the Senior Director of Influencer Marketing at Division D. Division D is an omni-channel media buying agency. I've been with Division D since 2019, and I've had the opportunity to build and grow our solution to help our brands connect with their audiences through impactful influencer marketing campaigns. So super excited to be on this conversation today.
Thanks for joining us, Brad. Tori, let me kick this to you.
Good. Hi. I'm happy to be here. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tori Brumfield from Evans Hardy & Young, or EHY. We are a food marketing agency. I am the Vice President, Director of Client Services here and lead client strategy for national food and beverage brands and commodity boards. A lot of my work centers on really helping teams kind of bring some big ideas together and to life, connecting influencer, social, digital, paid, retail, to drive results for the brand long-term, meeting KPIs. So really excited to be here and dive into this conversation.
Excited to have you here, Tori. And Noah, I'm kicking this to you.
Hi, everyone. Noah Eisman, Nicole, Brad, Division D. Thank you guys for inviting me to be on this with you. I am the Global Managing Director of Creator and Influencer at VML, which is under the WPP holding company, and it is a massive global full-service creative agency. And I've been with the team for about 6 months or so relatively pretty new to the VML world, but have been in the creator space the majority of my career and have attacked it from all angles, and excited to bring a lot of that knowledge to you guys today. And that's what I do generally on a day-to-day basis with VML's clients. Is I'm working with large enterprise clients as they figure out how do they apply creators and maximize business impact with creators. And so working through all the nuances of that across many different industries and types and scales. So excited to be here with you guys today.
Thanks for joining us, Noah. It's clear we have a great group of panelists here, and it's honestly safe to say that we're in an influencer world, and where instead of it being seen as more of an ancillary tactic, creators are now shaping culture and building their own communities and building communities for brands and even deciding which brands thrive. And with that comes challenges that we'll unpack today and how to scale, measure, and sustain those relationships with those creators. Before we dive in, though, let's get a quick read from all of you in our audience with a poll. What is your biggest challenge that you're seeing today? Brad, Tori, Noah, any thoughts on those?
I think one of the big. Go ahead. I think one of the biggest challenges we're seeing is just budget constraints and priorities, and aligning the priorities to the budgets is a big challenge here recently.
I was actually going to say similarly, that one really stood out to me because all the other ones generally stem from how successful people are at securing the right consistent budget and resource. So all of them are very relevant, but that one in particular for sure.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think marketers are just generally asked to and expected to solve a lot of different problems with a limited budget. So it's around, you got to drive leads, you got to drive sales, you got to drive love, you got to drive loyalty. So trying to be able to do each of those, you have to be very intentional on how you approach it, and being very strategic on how you make it all work.
Yeah, the results are across the board here, but proving ROI to leadership and finding those authentic brand fit creators and consistent resources seem to be the top three, and really dovetails nicely into a lot of what we'll be discussing today in how influencer is being treated inside of the broader marketing mix. And so thank you for everyone who weighed in, because that was a great snapshot of the room and a great segue. Tori, I'd love to use this as a jumping off point for you. Many still treat influencer marketing as a one-off campaign. What needs to shift for it to be fully embedded into that marketing mix when people are considering finding right fits and building budget for their leadership?
That is a great question. And for influencer marketing to be fully embedded into the marketing mix, it really comes down to one thing in my mind, and that is a mindset shift, which is often easier said than done, but it's also very simple. I found that if we stop thinking about influencer in the realm of a campaign and start thinking about it more as a capability, it really helps move the needle a little bit and make that mental shift of influencer is not just a tactic and it shouldn't live in the tactic bucket. You need to get over into the strategy bucket, because that really changes everything when you're planning to, researching and executing. Mostly because it stops us from thinking about things on a one-off post basis. And we start thinking about influencer from a strategic standpoint and planning at the beginning, so that we're building and we're using it as a content engine, maybe an insight resource center, if you will, and a way to build relevance, build community, as you mentioned, and really stay kind of culturally fluent, which is often difficult for many of the brands that I work with in the F&B space, because consumers are changing so often. And then, many times we're looking at, we got to go after the next generation when the current generation and the current shoppers are still as relevant. And so finding the way to build in the influencer at the beginning, influencer into the planning, I think is one of the first steps. And that goes into, really thinking about influencer can't be on the edges of the plans. I work with a lot of brands, and it's challenging because of budget and priorities and initiatives, improving that ROI. And part of what happens is you're bolting the influencer plan on rather than starting by bringing influencer into the planning conversations early, and really mapping out how it ladders up to the business goals and objectives, and identifying ways to measure and then report that back. So some of the things I'd recommend is during AOP, if we're asking ourselves what role will influencer play in the meeting and meeting our objectives this year, it's a game changer, because if we ask that right away, it becomes baked into the plan, and then we're able to make it a line item budget, find the resources to support it, and then integrate it across multiple channels. So I think if we just really find how we can bring it to the table early and often, that's going to be a big game changer.
And I would say that mindset shift has, had to happen fairly quickly, considering that, 10 years ago, we weren't really having these conversations about influencer and, slowly adding that into the marketing mix until it became an essential component, as you've laid out for us. If embedding influencer is the mindset shift, Noah, what does that look like tactically? You've described influencer as a center spoke of the marketing wheel.
Yeah, well, I think what Tori just kind of laid out is the first major step, right? You have to first get into that mindset of always on. And then once you're there, all of a sudden the doors and possibilities of how creators start to map their way, not just in their own capacity of, they might create something and post it on their channel, but all the other ways that content that's being created can live outside of their channel and impact different marketing objectives. And so one of the things that is becoming more apparent every day to people is that creators are unique because they have the unique ability to impact any stage of the funnel. And what really gets people excited is when, and this is the same as equating to like making a social video go viral, but creators also represent the unique ability to collapse the funnel into a single piece of content where you could get hit with a creator and discover something, learn about it, and have the ability to buy, which in the 10 years as creator and influencer has really grown up is kind of in its own new evolution of how that's coming to be. But given the fact that you can collapse the funnel with creators and why everyone would be like, that's very attractive, we should take advantage of that, it's really hard to actually do, because normally when people are coming into creators still, and why they still a lot of times are stuck in that campaign mindset and can't get to always on, is that they have trouble realizing that there are multiple priorities that you can tackle with creators, and it's how you rank them and think about them and then strategically break them down across a full year strategy. That's how you really start to consistently unlock creator work. So I generally frame up the 4 ways that you can use creators are to 1, drive awareness, of course, 2, to be a content engine and a way to supplement content production. You can then have them be a performance or conversion driver where they're generating leads or sales or app downloads. And then, of course, the community building. And for every different brand, whether you're a D2C brand or a retail CPG brand, you might rank those differently at a holistic brand level. And then as you get into each campaign, you might need to re-rank those priorities. But having that ranking very clear allows you then to very easily be like, oh, this makes sense that we're going to have to involve the paid media team, or this is going to be something that's going to involve our website and UX, or this is going to be only living in the context of social. And that's how you start to see how creators all of a sudden aren't just over here as part of its own, strategy. They're very much, to the way you kind of brought that analogy to life, Nicole, at the center of the spoke of the integrated marketing wheel.
Yeah, and we've seen the collapsing of the funnel conversation that you bring up happen across several different channels over the years. And what was once a legacy sort of mindset and mindset shift in how we look at buying and planning media was channel by channel. And even with influencer now, it really needs to be part of that centerpiece. And so, I'd love to even take that tactically a bit further. And Brad, if you want to weigh in and build off of what Noah said here on how we take that collapsing of the funnel into building influencer programs that are platform resilient and adaptable across different channels.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, it's all about exactly what Tori and Noah said. I think it's diversification. It's about building programs that are diversified across platforms, across tactics, across stages. And those are the ones that are able to flex and evolve as audiences move as well. So it's just really setting yourself up for long-term success. So when we talk about diversifying beyond platform, it's part of that connected ecosystem. It's about driving value. It's about fueling value across multiple channels through this tactic and complementing those. So when we take that influencer content and we put it in paid, so we put it on paid social, we put it on CTV, we put it on programmatic, we see that it's outperforming brand creatives. Similarly, when you take that influencer content and you put it on own channels, so your websites, your blogs, or even email, same thing. We're seeing that it's still, and many times, outperforming the brand creatives. So it's really that opportunity to drive its own unique value, but value beyond itself as well, and beyond that platform. And, whenever we talk about omni-channel, especially for us, like as a media buying agency, we're running programmatic, we're running social, we're running CTV, and of course, influencers. So that's the opportunity, and we should be thinking of it from that standpoint to tie it all together with that sequential approach. So the user sees a social ad. Okay, well, now we follow up, we hit them with an influencer tutorial of that product so they can see it in someone's hands. And then we follow up and we hit them with a promo code. Okay, now we're giving them the incentive to purchase. Let's say they make it to the website, but they're not converting. Well, we can retarget them again through programmatic and CTV and these other tactics. And then all of this can be done with influencer content. Each of those pieces can use influencer content that's already been created, that's already performing, that's already been paid for. Or it can be mixed in with brand creatives as well. So it is an opportunity to optimize those creatives between brand creatives and influencer. And it's just a value multiplier. It's just each feeds into the other and it's providing value beyond the individual part there. So taking influencer, getting everything you can out of it as its own individual tactic, but expanding it to your other tactics and driving success and value through those and making the most out of it in those ways too.
To that point, Brad, that's, I think it's such a smart mindset shift to think about how you can build an influencer marketing program, but then pull it across channels. And so many times, I think we just get stuck in doing things the same way, and we have to lift our heads up and kind of think a little bit differently and plan for that integration at the beginning. Think about, okay, if, these are our objectives, this is how we're going out and briefing and finding these creators. Now, how can we make sure we get the content that is going to be able to live across so many of those channels, just even if we're in the testing mode, to see, is that outperforming some of the brand content?
Yeah, I think you have to be very intentional, and that's what you're talking about there. Is it's about being part of the planning up front. It's including it from the get-go and knowing that we want to do this, we want to incorporate this, and it's not just, oh yeah, this is an add-on, and oh yeah, we should have influencer as part of this too, because we know we should, but it's being more intentional with that approach and connecting all those pieces from the start. So yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah,
just
Tori.
one thought to that too. I think one of the key unlocks to go a level even deeper into how to make all of that actually a reality is the idea that working with someone over and over again is much better than working with a lot of people for one time and having to go back to the well, where one of the major unlocks in how you get to efficient, always on programs is trying to maximize how often you work with a group of creators over and over again. And to do that, and why you want to do that is as you brief them, going back all the way to Tori, your point on planning, if you know you're going to try and use this content in CTV, is not just to try and brief them on a social piece of content and then as it performs well on social, just hope that it then will translate to CTV. It's how do you brief that creator where you're trying to build a long-term relationship with them and you're laying out your content plan with them and you're asked and you've brought them to the table because you've evaluated in some way that shows they're going to be a good fit, but then you're briefing them like you would any other creative on this is how we're going to bring this story to life and you're going to bring it to life across multiple types of content and styles and talking points to fit this overall content ecosystem that we're trying to build.
You guys raised some really great points here on the briefing and the value multiplier and everything from the process of planning and integrating these creators. And one thing that would certainly add to this is a touch on technology here. If we take it one step further, a lot of what we're hearing about in the creator space right now is using AI and other technology tools to push those boundaries and to do more of that planning process or create more of that value multiplier. So, Brad, can you dive into that piece for us and get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we talk about AI, I mean, at least right now with where it is, I think the value is specifically measured in efficiencies. So it's the efficiency in processing data, in collecting data, and interpreting data. We're informing the creative through deeper understanding of the conversations that we're able to dive into that are happening on social about our brands, about our products, those ones that are driving the more meaningful engagement and action. It's about more data to be able to understand which creators then can talk about those subjects for your brand. So the who of can drive that conversation forward. And then at the end of all of it, it's more data that we are able to use to inform the decision before we launch and review the data after we launch around what's actually working, where should we be pushing more resources, maybe where should we pull back from. To me, ultimately, AI right now is only as good as the hands that are manipulating it. It's not the answer by itself. It is just another tool in our marketing tool belt. So it's about right now investing in those tools, having access to get more data more quickly and making more informed decisions in less time, which then is more time back. So that's more time that can be spent on higher impact client needs or brand needs to be able to deliver more value elsewhere. And so again, using these tools just to analyze thousands of conversations for brands, we can again look at what people are saying about them, what people are saying about their competitors, understand the positives, the negatives, what's trending down. So what used to be what people talk about versus what are people talking about now. So these are all opportunities that then create the white space. So now we know, okay, with this data, we can work in this area, we can work in this space. This is where we want to be headed. And of course, I already kind of touched on how we then use that to find the influencers who are having those conversations or driving those conversations or most effective at driving those. So at that point, it's not that these are different things. Like these are the things we're already doing. But now with these tools and with these technologies, we're able to do them in a fraction of the time. So it's just happening much faster and with much better data. Again, it still requires expertise. It still requires experience to manipulate and inform the data as it goes in and as it comes out. But it's accelerating the process and it's giving us a stronger foundation for decision making. So again, I think that all just ties back to the efficiency of what it allows us to do better and faster.
Sure. And I mean, that's what we're all trying to do is building those efficiencies within our media plan so that we can also create the most impact for the clients that we're representing. Noah, where does the line between AI assistance and authenticity draw for you?
Yeah, well, I think in the context of what Brad was saying, how he described AI impacting workflow is spot on. I'm sure everyone that is on this call has been exposed to some tool that is out there that is helping in some way facilitate working with creators. And there are so many options out there, and there's a lot of sea of sameness. And a lot of them are also trying to adapt in their own way to bringing AI. And I think it all goes back to Brad's point. It's that hands-on keyboard is what makes the difference in using AI. And so I would say on that, before I switch over AI into the world of like content creation and how it's impacting that side of influencer, on the tech side of things, I think it's really important to evaluate what parts of the process in my influencer workflow do I need the most help with for tech. I think some people get by and can run very successful campaigns managing it all on a Google spreadsheet, but need the tool to help discover. Some people are great at jumping onto TikTok, Instagram, and finding their creators because they just kind of fall out of the Find You page. And what they really need help with is program management and reporting. So it's, how do you think about that? Tools are very expensive. Everyone wants to be the SaaS tool that is bought. And so it's also going back to that resourcing and budget question, knowing you need to have a tech stack that helps make this not a manual process for you is really important, but it's also being hyper selective and understanding where in the process do I need the most tech help, and then layering on the AI question to that of how it can help in those areas. Super important. On the other side of how AI is impacting creator content and the production, I would say that overall, it's something to embrace, but just with a lot of carefulness. And I would put it in this context: authenticity, which is a word that is used and what's honestly what makes influencer so unique, is also, in my opinion, something that you can scale up and down as needed. So if you scale it all the way down and it works to scale all the way down, it might make sense to use an AI generated influencer in your campaign if that is what calls for. But if you need to ramp up your authenticity all the way to max, bringing any AI into that equation is probably going to be very transparent and your audience will see through it. So it's a very nuanced kind of way of reframing. But if you think about authenticity as a scale and where it fits for your business objective and need, I found that to be a very good North Star to helping figure out how to apply AI into your creative production.
Yeah, authenticity, as you said, it's a buzzword that we're hearing across the board. And Tori, you specialize in food and CPG and all of that. So where does AI and the authenticity and the tool creation fall in your bucket? Love to hear from you.
Thank you. AI has added a new layer of complexity when we're thinking about food and CPG, just across social, creators, influencer programs. And it's not just the legal, perspective that AI poses from a contractual standpoint, and disclosures. It's also just reputational risk, primarily because we've already started to see, consumers calling out like lazy AI content generation. And whether that's from the brand or from a content creator. And in the food and CPG space, and probably all verticals, getting the trust and the credibility and maintaining that is job number one. And it takes a long time to do that, and it can erode really quickly when we're kind of leaning on AI to generate some content, or use synthetic voices or bring in different pieces. So I think it's just called out the need for more guardrails for us when we're looking at creators and working together. To Noah's earlier point, working with a bench of creators over the long haul versus one-off post and go kind of campaigns, it mitigates that risk, I think, of AI, because you've developed that relationship and that creator and kind of their ways of working. But it's also another filter that we need to put in as we're looking at the criteria of who we want to work with. And I think the other piece is just governance, right? Talking about governance. Having an approved claims library to prevent any inaccurate or unsafe information or statements out there. You have to have that human on the keyboard to make sure that, we're looking at that before any influencer content goes live. Having the mandatory AI disclosure policies and transparency about how AI is being used. and spelling it out of like when we need to take it down, some takedown procedures. So I think it's just added another layer, similar to, the last 10-year evolution. Our contracts have evolved, and we've had to put different policies in place as the space grows and changes, and tech becomes even more a part of the conversation.
It's very clear that there's two distinct buckets on how we have these conversations about AI under the scope of influencer, and that is it relevant to the creator and the actual creator content itself, or is it on the operational side of how we want to improve those efficiencies within the realm of how influencer fits into that whole larger marketing plan? So much so that some of this AI conversation isn't just unique to influencer, but to overall marketing plans across the board. Would you agree?
Definitely.
So with that, we've brought up a couple different times on how having consistent partnerships and scaling those creator partnerships is so critical, but that can get challenging. There's some operational pieces there where it's a little messy. From the group, I'd love to turn this over to each of you since you've individually brought it up at some point. Even with the strongest criteria, how are you advising and scaling those, I'm going to call it evergreen partnerships with creators?
Yeah, I think Noah and Tori already touched on it here too, but I think when there's an opportunity and when there's a strategic advantage to do so, having those partnerships over a longer period of time adds a ton of value. You know them, they know the brand, they know the brief, they know the processes, they know how it works, they know the expectations. So you have a relationship there, and that also just breeds additional efficiencies both in process but also in the creative. So in that example Noah talked about, creating for CTV versus creating for social, like knowing you're creating CTV, like that's additional assets that you can just turn to them and say, hey, yeah, we want you to make this post, but also can you like strip this version accordingly so that we can also use that there. And it's a much easier conversation to have with someone who you have a relationship with, who is capable of doing those things, who can be successful turning out those types of assets versus, okay, this is the first time we've worked with you, and we'll see how this goes. So I think a lot of that, it is just around the relationship building. It's the trust level that comes from knowing that they respect the brand, they respect the brand creatives, they respect the process, and you can have that mutual respect back with them, and knowing that they're a great partner who can deliver results. And then informed decisions too. At the end of the day, like if you can get insights from them, if they can tell you like, hey, we did this last time, but I think this would be better. I think this would go over better. I think this would perform better. These are the trends that I'm seeing. Let's capitalize on those. Those are boots on the ground. Those are the people who are actually living in the space, and they have that, like that is their core function, is to perform with their audience and to have content that their audience wants to see, wants to hear. So it's their goal to make good content, and you can leverage that feedback from them to say, all right, well, here's how we can make our content better, which ultimately performs better for the brand, which makes everyone happier across the board as well. So yeah, and I can pause there and let everyone else jump in with their thoughts too.
Yeah, well, I think to build on that, and to make that a reality and to have a process that even allows for that feedback loop to be in place, we've used the word program as we've talked about, like building a creator program, but it's not just using that word just as a word. It's meaning there's a structure and tier to how you are bringing creators through different tiers of relationship status inside of your influencer program. So for example, the lowest status that you might have is I found a piece of UGC content from someone that already created something about my brand. I am just reaching out to them to acquire the rights to that piece of content. If that then performed well, and there's no relationship building there, you just transactional, I acquired it, I'm running it. But if it performed well, you might want to go back to them and now get them to do something with you. And that requires then all of a sudden a new level of relationship. And that can take a lot of different forms where we're talking about, a nano or UGC, piece of content there. But that can even start at a celebrity or very well-established influencer relationship where you don't have to bring them into a paid partnership immediately. They might not be down for it, but you can have a program structure that you're taking them through, or maybe you do start them at a higher tier, but at least you know that you're starting them at a higher tier. And here's the process for how we handle that level of relationship versus a lower level of relationship in our creator program. So it takes a lot of nuance and like really getting multiple layers deep into how you think about it. But that's how you start to unlock all of this consistency across your campaign and program.
That's really smart. One thing that you kind of triggered in my mind is this idea that, yes, you have to have a program and we can build it from the top to the bottom, nano to macro. One of the things that I've seen work quite well is this two-way communication, which is like an aha. That's what we're having here. The audience isn't able to talk to us as much, but we'll get to the Q&A. But it's this influencer partnerships. I've seen the evolution from just here's the brief, go execute, to here's the brief, let's talk about it, let's collaborate, let's ideate, and then having that communication when the content goes live as well. So the brand's interacting in the influencer's feed, and then we have kind of like a post campaign or a post annual review of like what worked, what didn't work, and have some of those insight innovation conversations. And that's really, I think, brand new in the last year or so, at least from our perspective of having a real two-way communication with the influencer partners, regardless of, nano to macro.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've probably all had those conversations where, it's that education process of, do not, to the brand, do not write the script. You don't want to write the script unless, and no, you kind of touched on this too, unless it's for a very intentional purpose and it's for a very intentional use case. But if you're talking about true influencer, like you want to lean on their partnership, you want to lean on their voice. So let them write that. And there's been multiple instances where we have those conversations and that trust is given. And an influencer says, I don't think this is the best approach. I would like to do this instead. And it is a trust. It takes trust in the brand. It takes trust in us being able to communicate that effectively both ways as well. But then you see that it performs so much better. It outperforms the other pieces of content. And you say, yeah, look, this worked. This is an example of a successful use case of that two-way street. And you really want to be strategic with that. I don't think you can let every single influencer you work with dictate every single brief and every single creative every single time. That would get very messy and it would expose yourself to a lot of risk there. But I think when you can and when you have those relationships, when they're done intentionally, when they're isolated and they're identified strategically like that, then I think it just adds tons of value for everyone.
Yeah, go ahead, Tori.
I was just gonna build there in terms of, pushing the envelope a little bit on, we report on metrics and outcomes, but let's also report on some insights that the creator is bringing to us, rather than just how did it perform. Let's talk about how did it perform and why, and what can we do next.
Right, because they've built their communities and they know who's and what type of content is going to get their audience liking, sharing, commenting, and it might not be a complete overhaul on the creative brief, right? But it could be those micro suggestions that really take it from a B to an A as far as campaign performance and the opportunity to get unique insights back that aren't just generic metrics. So we are about 10 minutes out from completion of our webinar here, and I'd love to get to some of the Q&A, but first, we've heard today that influencer is becoming more sophisticated as it pushes into that central spoke of the marketing wheel and as a piece of brand strategy. And so before we dive into closing thoughts with our esteemed panelists here, we do have one final poll question for our audience. After everything that you've heard today and listened to, what's your top influencer priority over the next 12 months? Brad, Tori, Noah, any surprises on what's listed here? Something that's sparking any ideas, whether that's streamlining workflows, building long-term partnerships? We've touched on all of it.
No, I don't. Again, I think the building long-term creative partnerships is, for me, all the other ones fall under that. Where, for example, if you focus on building long-term creative partnerships, you will have more ability to launch and test new platforms and formats. And so I think it all kind of falls under that kind of lens.
Yeah. I don't think we got to touch too much on improving measurement and reporting or tracking back to how do we prove KPIs to leadership that, influencer marketing is in that center spoke. But to your point, Noah, when you have those longer term relationships and it's not, and you're thinking about it from a planning standpoint, you can start to map the creators, the programs to the business outcomes. And like you said, the funnel is collapsed. So it's really finding just some of those trackable, measurable opportunities and setting the groundwork. It may not be a direct link to sales, but it is a direct link to a conversation, some relationship building, and we just have to find ways to quantify that.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's all about, like we've talked on a couple of times here, it's all about connecting all of the different dots together through influencer marketing and pulling them all together, measuring them all on the same values and understanding what is driving the value, where can we drive more, understanding the strategy behind each. So it's connecting all those dots through that ideation.
Thank you to the audience for bookmarking, that perspective. And for our panel, I'm going to turn over, I think we'll have time for 2 to 3 questions for the audience. Those questions that we do not have a chance to get to, we will follow up after this webinar for you. But really quickly, what are some industries that have, let's call it, untapped potential to utilize influencer marketing?
Yeah, I think from our end, one that we're seeing are those that are very informationally heavy. So when you think about like your utility providers, your local governments, like I think that's an area that they're understanding that there's a ton of value here. These are ones where you don't pick your customer base, and your customer base doesn't really pick you. So it's very different in the sense of we're not trying to drive a conversion necessarily. We're not trying to drive a sale, but it's about creating the connection and opening up new opportunities to communicate what's going on, whether that be changes to how different things are working, or whether that be benefits or opportunities for this customer base, or this user base, or this your citizens, understanding what's going on there. So it's reaching them through these new mediums that are highly effective at driving that awareness for them. And so I think that's an area that's really, we've seen a lot of growth in. And, of course, I think B2B is an area that always has tons of room to expand too. But yeah, I'll start it off there.
I'm seeing a few questions on people that don't have influencer marketing as a current tactic, or that their companies don't have it as a strategy. So I'm going to combine a few of these into a question that's convincing skeptical stakeholders on the use of influencer. What would any of you suggest to overcome that and make it more than just a test budget?
Yeah, so I was looking at some of these and typing out a couple answers. I would say, my recommendation on that one in particular is look back at how well your influencer story is tying to the business objectives that your stakeholders care about most. And it's not just saying generally, oh, we want to use influencers to generate awareness, but how much awareness, and does that amount of awareness make any difference to your key stakeholders? And take that example and apply it to a conversion metric or to a content production metric, and really trying to connect it to that, and then painting that bigger picture of, if you did invest X amount, here is what we could do. And so it does take, shifting into a little bit of a true business story that you're telling, but that's one of the, I think, key takeaways, hopefully, from this conversation, is that there are ways to do it. It takes a little bit more effort and thinking, but it's definitely worthwhile.
I'd also suggest, I mean, at the end of the day, stakeholders want to know what's the return, right? What's the return on my investment? But I also think challenging them to put on their consumer hat and to think about how they go about their day, their daily lives, whether they're, out of category, moments, in consideration moments, and think about how they're consuming media and where that influence is coming from. And just push and probe and use some of those, use that as an anecdotal way to kind of bridge the gap between this is something you're using and you're being influenced by. And that's something we need to look at, how we can find the right audience and leverage that as a strategic lever in our toolbox. Sometimes it's just bringing it down to, human to human behavior.
Yep,
We've got another question that I think is applicable to probably many that have joined us, in that they are a small agency and different influencer platforms are cost prohibitive. What suggestions would the group here have to get started for those who don't have the test budgets to execute within those larger, we'll call it technology tools?
Yeah, so this is a tough one. Well, not a tough one. I would say it's going to require a lot of researching on your part and having a lot of initial demo conversations with certain companies. And it goes back to something I had said earlier, which is really thinking about what is the type of tech that I need the most right now to get to the next step that I'm struggling to get to. So if it is purely creator discovery, there are lots of tools that exist out there. Maybe it's not as the best UX out there, maybe, or it doesn't have the most expansive influencer base, or maybe they're founded out of Europe versus the United States, but there are ones that come in at a much cheaper price point that will allow you to do parts of the process. So it's really about figuring, given the constraints that I have from a budget perspective, where if I were to insert tech into any part of the influencer process, where would I need that? And then starting from there. So, to another question of like, what are the best ones? There are too many to list or like go into, and it's honestly so subjective based on so many little nuances for what your particular brand or agency would be looking for. But resources to go to, I recommend, if anyone knows the website G2 Crowd, you can go and search influencer platforms. Great resource. I think Influencer Marketing Hub has also generally tried to list out a lot of the top ones. Some of those initial ones are going to fall back into the category of being generally too expensive, but starting there and then continuing to dig and do your research. Over the years, I've generally found many of them that are at the price point that a small business could start at. So they are out there. You just have to search a little bit and be willing to take a initial risk on something and test and learn, honestly, but doing it knowing that you're not, signing up for a massive year-long contract with some of the bigger SaaS players.
Yeah, and I think to Noah's point too, it's like you proof of concept, and once you prove that it's working, and you use one of these maybe light versions of a tool or a specific use case tool, you show the successes, and maybe you take that up to leadership, you get more budget approved. Well, now maybe you do invest in a larger scale opportunity, and it's just showing like, okay, start small, start with what you can get, start what you can afford. Use that to get it going and show how successful this can be, and then leverage that to get additional budget to invest in those resources that will ultimately make it more approachable for you to do in the long term as well.
There's a lot of growth and opportunity as this continues to scale, and I see questions about the saturation of influencer marketing and concerns potentially about creative wear out. And I'm excited to follow up on a lot of these questions that are still in the queue that we don't have time to get to today. But with that, I just want to say thank you to each of our panelists, Brad, Tori, Noah, for joining us on this evolution of influence conversation. We appreciate the audience joining us as well, and we look forward to following up on some more of these questions and diving further into influencer in a future webinar. So I hope everyone has a great day, and thank you for joining.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Noah. Thanks, Tori.
Guys.